In a quiet corner of the city, a young woman steps into a world where trust is a luxury and power is a game. But when a racist officer crosses her path, threatening to make her disappear, he has no idea who he's dealing with. She's not just any woman. She holds a position that can shatter his world in an instant. The stakes are higher than he realizes, but will he live long enough to find out? What happens when the hunter becomes the hunted? Stay with us, because this story is about to take a dangerous turn. Emily had always kept her head down, moving through life like any other determined woman trying to make a name for herself in a world that wasn't always welcoming. She had built a steady career, found a rhythm in her daily routine, and even managed to find peace in a city that seemed indifferent to her presence. But deep down, she knew the world wasn't as fair as it seemed. As a woman of color, she had faced her share of microaggressions and barriers, but she pushed through, using her quiet strength to climb the ladder of success. By day, Emily was just another face in the office, a talented worker unnoticed in the grand scheme of things. But what most didn't know was that by night, she held a position of influence far beyond what her colleagues could imagine. She worked in the FBI, an agent specializing in high-stakes investigations, maneuvering in the shadows of power. It wasn't a job she took lightly, but it gave her the tools to navigate a world that often felt hostile. Her routine was simple, her life was controlled, until one fateful morning, when everything she had worked for would be tested. It started like any other day. The rush of morning traffic, the coffee shop with its familiar hum of voices, and then the encounter. A racially charged exchange with a cop filled with unprovoked venom. But this wasn't just any officer. This was a man who underestimated Emily in the worst way possible. Unknowingly, he had just crossed a line, one that would bring both their worlds to an explosive head. Emily had been used to the stares, the whispered comments behind her back, the subtle judgment in the eyes of strangers. She'd learned to ignore them, to carry on like they didn't exist. But this was different. It happened just after she left the coffee shop that morning. She was heading back to her car when the screeching of tires caught her attention. A patrol car skidded to a halt right in front of her. The door swung open, and out stepped Officer Daniels, his uniform crisp, but his attitude sharp, cold. He'd been eyeing her from across the street as she walked, but now he was blocking her path. "Got a minute?" His voice was laced with a condescending tone that made her skin crawl. Emily tried to keep her composure. "Is there something wrong, officer?" she asked, her voice steady but cautious. The officer smirked, his eyes narrowing in an almost predatory way. "Well, it's not every day we see someone like you walking around these parts. Don't you have better places to be?" He crossed his arms, looking her up and down, clearly dismissing her as someone who didn't belong. A flash of irritation sparked in Emily's chest, but she quickly masked it with a calm expression. She'd been through worse before. "I'm just trying to get to my car," she said, taking a step back, ready to move on. But Daniels wasn't finished. "You think you're better than the rest of us?" he sneered. "Let me tell you something. People like you don't get to play in this game. You don't have the power. You don't have the control." The words hit her like a slap, but she refused to let him see her anger. She'd worked too hard to let someone like him provoke her, but that's when it came, the final blow, the line she'd never thought anyone would cross. With a cold smile, Daniel stepped forward, lowering his voice to a near whisper, but loud enough for only Emily to hear. "I could make you disappear, you know, make all this go away. No one would even blink an eye." The air seemed to freeze around her. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. But there it was, his unmasked contempt. He had no idea who she was, what she could do. A tight knot formed in her stomach. She wanted to say something, to lash out, but she knew she couldn't. She had to stay calm, calculated. This wasn't just some random cop making threats. This was a man who thought his badge and privilege could shield him from consequences. Her mind raced. This wasn't the first time she'd faced bigotry, but this time was different. This time, the officer had crossed a line. She wasn't just some civilian anymore, she was an agent. And this wasn't just a random threat, it was a direct challenge to everything she stood for, everything she had built. As Daniels turned to leave, his words echoed in her mind. But they weren't just words. They were a warning that the fight wasn't over. It was only just beginning. Emily didn't know how she was going to handle it yet. But one thing was certain. Officer Daniels had just made a dangerous mistake, and she wasn't going to let it slide. As Emily stood there, heart pounding, she glanced around, wondering if anyone had seen the interaction. But just as she turned to leave, she noticed something that made her freeze in her tracks. A familiar, black SUV parked at the far end of the street. Someone was watching her. The following days passed in a blur. Emily couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. The tension was unbearable. Officer Daniels' words haunted her at every turn. "I could make you disappear." She kept her head low, stayed inside, tried to avoid confrontation. But she couldn't hide forever. Then came the phone call. It was late, the kind of late where the city felt deserted, the quiet suffocating. Emily was sitting at her kitchen table, papers scattered around her, trying to push through the exhaustion. Her phone buzzed, breaking the silence. It was an unknown number. She hesitated, but something told her to pick up. "Emily," a voice growled on the other end. "You should have stayed in your lane." It was Daniels. His voice was laced with venom, dripping with threats. Her heart hammered in her chest. "What do you want?" she demanded, trying to mask the tremor in her voice. "Oh, I think you know," he sneered. "I'm not going to stop. You think you can threaten me? You think you can hide behind your little FBI badge? I'm untouchable, and you, Emily, are just a nuisance. Get ready." Her blood ran cold. She knew exactly what that meant. He wasn't just trying to intimidate her. He was preparing to ruin her life. He was coming for her, and no one would care. He held all the power, the badge, the protection. But Emily wasn't about to go down quietly. With a sudden surge of courage, she hung up the phone and grabbed her own weapon, her knowledge, her strength. She was an FBI agent, and she had the skills to dismantle a man like Daniels piece by piece. This wasn't just about power anymore, it was about survival. It was about standing up, even when every part of her body screamed to run. As she dialed the number for her supervisor, her pulse quickened. The first step had to be taken now. This was it. She was about to bring down a man who thought his badge could shield him from the consequences of his actions. But just as the phone began to ring, her doorbell echoed through the house. A chill ran down her spine. Who was it at this hour? The weeks that followed were a whirlwind. Officer Daniels was arrested, but Emily knew that wasn't the end. His arrest wasn't just about justice for her. It was a statement, a message that no one, not even those with power, could escape accountability when they abused it. But the weight of what had happened lingered. Emily had been dragged into a war she never asked for, a fight she didn't want to be part of. But in that fight, something changed within her. The fear, the helplessness she had once felt, slowly began to transform into strength. She was no longer just a victim of prejudice and hatred. She was a survivor. And more importantly, she was a force to be reckoned with. The media covered the case for days. The city, once indifferent to her struggles, now knew her name. But the fight wasn't just about her. It was about every person who had been made to feel small, invisible, powerless. Emily's case was a symbol that racial injustice doesn't always go unnoticed. It was a reminder that those who seek to control others through fear could still be defeated. The truth was, Emily wasn't just fighting a single man. She was fighting an entire system of discrimination that had long been ingrained in the fabric of society. Daniels represented more than just one bad officer. He was part of a larger, insidious problem, a system that allowed racism to fester in places of power. But Emily didn't let it define her. She knew the road ahead would still be difficult, but she also knew she wasn't alone. The fight for justice never ends, and each victory, no matter how small, makes a difference. As the case closed and Emily returned to her life, one question lingered in her mind. How many more stories are out there, waiting to be heard? If you've ever felt silenced, or if you've witnessed injustice, don't remain quiet. Share your story. Stand up. Because the fight for equality is far from over, and it's our responsibility to keep pushing for change. Share this video, and let's continue to amplify the voices that need to be heard.